In today's exercise, you will observe students who are studying a picture closely and describing what's there, building explanations and interpretations, reasoning with evidence, making connections to what they've been studying, considering different viewpoints and perspectives, and then capturing the heart and forming conclusions. Now, the ultimate goal for me as the teacher is to see my students demonstrating a greater understanding, which in this case is to understand the impact of the Civil War and what it's had on a family and on its children, the family's children, like themselves. I want them to become more engaged in this topic of study by inferring what's going on and comparing their thoughts with their partners within their groups, and then to finally display their independence as learners when they are able to explain to their group as a whole what they've learned. And the two thinking strategies that you're going to see demonstrated here that I've selected are the See, Think, Wonder routine and then the sentence, phrase, word routine. Alright, so boys and girls, we've been studying and spending a lot of time just studying about the Civil War. And so in that, we've been looking very closely at how it impacted people's lives. Okay, and so what I want you to think about right now is we have two sides of a country fighting against each other. Were those people, were they different? Really different? The North, the people who lived in the North and the people who lived in the South, were they really that different? What do you think?
They were different because the Union did not want slaves in the North, and the South wanted slaves, and they had different economies. The Union had factories, and the South had farming and agriculture.
Good. So their ways of life were very different. But let me ask you this. If they met each other on the battlefield, were they a lot different? Were they looking at people that were a lot different? West?
No, because a person is a person, and the only thing that's different about it is what they want.
Okay. Their ideals are different.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Did we talk at all about the fact that families were divided?
Yes.
So if we think that they were very, very different, the people who fought for the North and the people who fought for the South, would you think that if it was related to a family? What did you think?
I don't think they're that different. It's just they have different opinions.
Excellent. You're exactly right. So if a family had shared a different opinion, a family member shared a different opinion with another family member, would that be significant enough reason to go pick up a gun and go on the battlefield and aim at each other and say, we're going to duke this out till the better person wins?
No.
So do you think that was a hard thing to do?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So do you think there were people who were involved in the war that didn't really, once they got out there, they didn't really know what they were doing there?
Yeah.
There probably were a lot of people like that. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that because you guys are getting ready to begin a novel unit study. And you're going to be looking, we're going to be reading historical fiction that's based on the Civil War, and you're going to be looking at the lives of some people who were involved in the whole war. It had a huge impact on their lives, but it wasn't necessarily something they chose, or it wasn't something that they would have chosen if they really knew what they were getting into. And we're going to be really looking at that. So before we do that, I want to start out with an activity today that's a See, Think, Wonder routine, which will give you a chance to really look at some of the work in this author's book. The author of this book is Trinka Hakes Noble, and the book is The Last Brother, and it's a Civil War tale. But it's really, truthfully, it is a true story. It's based on the life of a real person. And so before we go very deep into that book, I wanted to give you guys a chance to really study some of the pictures, because the pictures are beautiful in this book. And they really, really tell a story in and of themselves. Okay, so you're going to have a few minutes to work with your partners in your group I'm going to give you a picture. I want you to really take the time to study the picture. I want you to talk about what you see. Don't read the text. Spend the time talking about what you see. Talk amongst yourselves about what you think is happening. And then talk about what you wonder. What you wonder about is happening. Okay? Any questions about what we're doing? All right.
It looks like they are brothers, and it looks like they're drummer boys because they look almost exactly alike. And maybe they're fighting for one of them is fighting for the Union, one of them is fighting for the Confederate, because as you can see, they are both wearing different shirts.
Yeah, and you can see the two trumpets that they use.
Yeah, maybe they're drummer boys.
And where do they have the time to meet?
I don't know.
Maybe at nap time.
Maybe it's between wars whenever they were traveling, and maybe they had some free time during the
Or maybe they just ran into each other and hid and started talking about it.
Like a brand on it, and I see this kid over here shushing him and more soldiers in the background.
I see what you see, but I see that this guy has a blue one, and so does he, and so do they. So they can't be Confederate soldiers, and they can't be enemies of grandma.
And what's the dad doing?
Trying to cover her.
Why? Why do you think the adults are so sad and the kids are so happy?
They don't know they know what's going on, but they don't.
What do the parents think they know what's going on? What do you mean by that?
They think that they know how many people have died, how many people have suffered from this.
I think you're right. They probably know a lot more about the people in the community who've gone off to war and died and passed away. The boys probably don't really realize the impact. It's probably not really impacting the kids yet at this point. Do you think it's the beginning of the war, or do you think it's more?
I think it's a little bit into the war.
A little bit into the war?
Because they didn't start having younger kids go into
That's a good point. They wouldn't have initially started sending the kids off. Good point. Very good point. That's good thinking. So here's what you're going to do, okay? You're going to do the sentence, phrase, word routine now, okay? So what I want you to do is each one of you will have a different sentence, okay? You're going to read the passage together as a group. Then I want each one of you to take a few minutes to pull out a passage, a sentence that hit you, that you thought was interesting. Then I want you to pull out a phrase. And then I want you to pull out a word. Remember, the whole point of this routine is so that you're basically summarizing the text between your sentence, phrase, and word for the picture. Okay? And after you have each one gone through that time of writing down your thoughts, then I want you to put it on your green sheet and I want you to talk about it. And I'm going to be coming around to talk to you and to hear some of your thoughts and some of your thinking. Okay, let's go. And so during this part of the lesson where my students are engaged with making sense of the text, I'm able to see a lot about what my students are taking away from the text and what strikes them as so important. Does their reasoning show that they're capturing the essence of the text? Are they identifying significant concepts and issues? What kind of personal connections are behind the words, the phrases, and sentences that they selected and wrote down? And then also, are they listening to other group members and connecting their responses to their partners? You know, it's so important that the students are using the words, phrases, and sentences as springboards to deepen and enrich their discussions. I want to see my students taking that knowledge that they've gleaned from our study of the topic of Civil War and use that information as they analyze the lives of the characters in the picture book and then the lives of the characters that they're going to be reading about in their historical fiction novels. For them to know that this is a true story in this picture book that they're analyzing, that only validates the factual information that they've been learning and with regard to the impact that the Civil War had on the people and the families.
And that more of their army was in the background, but sure that the text says that these two are just friends, but they got enrolled in different armies. And this kid right here is with this regiment back here. And like,
So they're fighting on different sides?
yes, and he's trying to tell him to get away so that he doesn't get hurt.
Oh,
Him and his
wow.
horse.
Do you think that's realistic of what really took place? Do you think there were things like that that really happened?
But they didn't want to fight against each other.
Okay.
Their mom and dad.
They're just kids. Their mom and dad forced them? Do you think their mom and dad forced them?
No, probably not.
Well, remember at the
Their
play
parents wanted to.
that the mom took.
Yes, you know, there were families that the moms would send the boys off because they just couldn't take care of them. So that's a good point, Daniel. But we don't really know their story, do we? But they're friends, and you learned that from what you read. Okay. Take me a little bit through the picture, because a lot of times when we look at a picture and study a picture before we read the text, our thinking is very different from what we've learned. So take me a little bit through the picture and tell me what you learned by looking at the picture.
We thought that he was trying to hide behind
The teepee,
because he didn't want it to like get taken out from the battle because like all these people were fighting the
So
other
you think
side.
maybe he's fearful?
And then like we thought he was the Union because we saw these navy blue people out here, and we thought he was a trumpet boy because he had a trumpet. And we thought this was like some supplies, like a drink, and a crate of supplies, and like a duffel bag and some stuff.
Okay. So then you read the text. Tell me a little bit about what you learned and how it might be different from what you saw.
Well, it said
and you thought
that
and wondered
that
about.
the Union campfires burned all night, but he couldn't get to sleep. And we also kind of thought that it might have been like morning or night because it was all red back here, and that usually means sun rising or sun going down. And it said that like he kept thinking about Davy and Orly, afraid of what might happen tomorrow. And
So you think he has friends
yes, and he was
fighting on what side? His side?
yes,
Okay.
and he might have been afraid because he wouldn't know if he would ever get to see them again because he was out there on the
That's
battlefield.
a lot for a kid to have to think about, isn't it? And be careful of. So let me ask you then. I noticed on your word. What was your word?
Cemetery Ridge.
And why was that a significant word to you?
Because we read a story earlier, our group, and it talked about a cemetery, and there was a big battle going on at it, and like they kept burying people and fighting there.
And what was that battle?
The Battle of Gettysburg?
Interesting. So do you think that this is the same battle?
Maybe.
Very good connection. Very interesting. So what was the sentence that you thought was significant?
All through the night, the Union campfires burned on Cemetery Ridge, but Gabe couldn't sleep. And my phrase was on Cemetery Ridge.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting thinking, Tyler, and I like the way that you pulled in other stories that you've read recently and you're kind of putting the pieces together. It's very interesting. Good job, guys. Keep on. So I've seen a lot of good thinking and a lot of good dialoguing going on as I've gone around to some of your groups. And so what I want to ask you is, did you feel like that you learned a lot more after you studied the picture and then you read the text? Did you find that what you thought originally and what you learned from reading the text were very different?
Yes.
Okay.